the original idea behind it. You're done training, but you're not really done, because a lot of people go through that identity crisis. So I wanted those lessons in there. But when I started to look back through, a lot of the lessons are all the same. Perception changes. Why in the do you care about them when you should care about the people that are in the room that are closest to the casket? They're the ones that build who you are. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk.
Thank you for joining us. My guest today is Dave Tate. Dave, thank you for coming all the way from your office to join us today.
And it was a big deal. My pleasure.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a gargantuan effort for you. Now, we are here today to talk about your most recent book,
Yes.
Racking the Bar.
Yes.
Now, the first question that I have about this book, which you guys are all going to be able to get access to, is what made you write it? What was the catalyst that said to you, this needs to be a third installment, I need to do this?
It's three things that kind of came together. I wrote Under the Bar, and I wrote this down, 2005. Then I wrote Raising the Bar in 2007. And I've been wanting to write Racking the Bar probably since 2010, right? So it's been on my to-do list as a no priority. You know, you have low, medium, and high this whole time. And I haven't wanted to do it because writing a book is a pain in the ass, as you know. This is a little bit easier. But I write a little every day, not as much this year as I have in the past. But when we were posting blogs and training logs, I would write something every single day, but most of those never got published, right? Especially since written content's kind of tanked because of that. So that was the first thing. It's been on the list forever. The second thing is on Instagram, I started writing observations, right? And they did fairly well. And the observations are just looking back on 4 decades, what perceptions are the same, what have changed. And then the third was kind of you, because you told me to start journaling again, right? So then I found when I started doing that, I was actually taking the observation as I was writing and just cataloging more and more and more observations. And I think 20 of them were posted on Instagram, but I have a list of like 150. Right. And that's before I start looking at photos and all this other stuff. And so when I started to compile all those observations for the ebook for the crew, my first thought was this would be like 30 or 40 pages. And then by the time I was done with the first group of all that, it was 280 pages. And so then it became, is this Racking the Bar? Right? I don't really know if it is or if it isn't, because it's in a different format than the Under the Bar and the Raising the Bar. But all that content is that. And it's going to keep growing, you know, from there, because there's 50 of them that are in there. And now that I'm back into writing regularly, I could have kept going, you know, on this, but you got to stop at a certain point. But that document won't, you know, we'll just kind of keep continuing from there. So those three things coming together, put it into this format. This format, I'm not going to make it into a book, because I don't want to go into that format. It's just way too much formatting. This has got all the content, all the information in there.
So it was kind of a beautiful accident in a way.
Yes.
So is your desired outcome of this book different to the others then, because it's come about in a different way? Is there something that you want to achieve through this book?
Yeah. The first one was I wanted to have my values documented for my kids, because they were younger. Now that they're all older and they've still never read it, it really wasn't it wasn't that. And then the first one too was more aspirational. I was writing about a lot of stuff that my wife at the time would say, you're a hypocrite. So I was writing about a lot of the things that I probably wanted to be. And the second one was written after a really bad time, a really rough patch, and reflecting on why it was a rough patch, how I got to that position. And then that kind of became the second one. Then this one was more, the Racking the Bar, I wanted it to be, the original idea behind it was I wanted it to be, you're done training, right? And but you're not really done, right? Because a lot of people go through that identity crisis and all the other kind of stuff associated with that. So I wanted those lessons in there. But when I started to look back through, a lot of the lessons are all the same, but the perception changes.
True.
With each decade, actually, as I kind of went through there and started to segment it out, it was like, oh, okay, this is still the same, but it's not, with most of those things. So the takeaway would be the one section in there where I write about being the guy on the other side of the table. That's essentially what this whole thing is.
Yeah.
So when I was a younger lifter and people would sit down and try to give me advice, breakfast or whatever it is, I'd sit there and listen no, I wouldn't. I would pretend to listen to them, right? But blew it all off because it's, man, you're washed up, you're a has-been. Hell, I'm actually stronger than what you are, that you ever were. So what are you going to tell me that has any value? And now I'm that guy. You know what I'm saying? So the advice I try to always keep in mind is when you're that guy, you got to remember what it was like to be the other person, the one that's not listening.
True.
Right. And a lot of people get super frustrated about that because they'll stop messaging and they don't realize that a lot of those conversations I had with those people, I had to hear that message 50 times, 100 times before it stuck.
True.
And it may not have been that person it stuck with, but that foundation was laid from that. And when you're in that position to where now you're that guy, it's really super easy to get frustrated. A lot of my friends get frustrated. A lot of my acquaintances I know that have been around the game for a long time get frustrated as well, and they just kind of give up. And it's like, you understand, you wouldn't listen either. And so that's the huge takeaway from that.
Yeah. So is that a two-sided problem then? It's on the younger side, needs to be an openness and an open-mindedness. But then perhaps on the other side of the table, as you're alluding to, does the message need to be delivered differently to make it more applicable or easier to digest for those younger individuals, do you think?
100% it's a two-sided problem, right? But neither side know it's a two-sided problem.
Yeah, sure.
Which becomes that problem where and this is going to sound really weird because most people think opposite of this. I think it's better now than it has been in the past. I think it's better now than when I was the person sitting there and people were trying to give me advice.
What makes you say that?
The correspondences and the communication that I've had, with people, that time frame to where, say you have a younger lifter that's just overreaching, doing stupid shit, right? Which they can kind of get away with it. Yes, you can talk about it, but it's not going to work. They're going to have to learn on their own accord, right? Through that time period, I'm just going to throw numbers out to illustrate, might have used to have taken 5 or 6 years. Now it's like 2, right? So the messaging is also being reinforced with online content, which is saying the same messaging. So it's not just, Patrick O'Farrell, who was a police officer when I first started first started training powerlifting and so forth when I was a teenager. It's not just him talking to me over lunch or breakfast.
True.
It's him talking to me, but then me seeing those same messages, if I was back then in today's world, across Instagram, across Facebook, across TikTok, across everywhere else, reinforcing what he's saying.
True.
Right? So that is the good aspect of social media.
Yeah, sure. So it's individual has to hear the message 100 times before it clicks, and now they're getting it 100 times faster than they were before.
And it might take 1,000 now, but they're getting to 1,000 a lot quicker.
So that was actually straight into, so I basically got a whole bunch of questions that actually go through the order of the book. I literally read it yesterday morning and just put it all down in order. So I'm going to actually number the points that these are relevant to so that people who are listening then can reference it. So number 3 is no excuses, and it goes straight into this kind of topic where you're talking about how you go through a period where you prioritize the gym too much, you train too hard, so on and so forth. Lessons come from that. You're talking about that learning window shortening, but does that process have to happen, in your opinion? Does a person have to over prioritize and push too hard because there's a lesson within that, regardless of how long it takes, that you have to go through at some point to end up being the person on the other side of the table, perhaps?
Yes and no. Yes, if they want to, say if it's strength sports and they want to compete at a higher level. Yes. If it's a profession that they're in that they want to get to the, the highest level. Yes. They're going to have to do more. And just training extra hard is just one illustration. If it's a job, it's working extra hard. It's the more hours that you put in there. That's going to have to happen to where other things are going to take the sidelines, because of that. So it gets criticized a lot, but, the over focusing or whatever words people use now, putting it as the highest priority. For me, powerlifting was the highest priority and vastly set. I wouldn't even say second. Number 100 would have been, the next
Other
priority
stuff.
down. If somebody aspires to be the best that they can be in that thing, then yes, I think that's necessary. But accountability is also necessary. So with that, knowing that that's what you're doing and all these other things are going to blow up, know that they're going to blow up, take accountability for the fact that it blew up, and then learn from it. Because you can, all those things can be destroyed, and then you blame all those people and all those things for your lack of progress.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? When that was your choice to be able to do that. And if you learn from those and you take accountability for each one of those by not making excuses from all those things, and then you learn from them, then you get to the ones that matter faster.
Yeah.
Right? Because we'll see it with the podcast with different people we have out. They're all in on the things that they're conveniently all in on, but then they don't realize until that's foundation's there. I think it's necessary to be there because when you go all in on the things that you want to go all in on, at least you're learning what going all in means. Right? So you learn, oh man, that was too much. That was a problem. My wife hates me now. That's a problem. And then when you learn where the tipping point is for all that, as well as the point that's necessary for you to move forward, then that frees up the other time to focus on the things that you haven't got to.
Sure.
Sleep, nutrition, rest, all those other priorities that fall in there.
Sure. So do you have things now or advice for others who are struggling to reality check themselves? There are people who are making all the progress that they can possibly make, whether it's entrepreneur or lifter, but they are sacrificing more than they need to actually do that.
Are they?
Well, I'm sure there are. They exist, right? They probably don't need to be an asshole to their wife or whatever it might be. How would you say to someone that they would kind of reality check themselves to say that you're using your endeavor over here as a lifter or whatever as an excuse to be absent in these areas?
Yes.
How would you advise someone kind of check themselves?
It's really kind of simple because are you still progressing? 9 out of 10 times the answer is going to be no. Right? Because the stress that's being accumulated from all those things is inhibiting the main thing. Right? So when they're not progressing, there's no ifs, ands. If we're talking strength athletes, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is true because you're only going to make that rapid progress for so long. 3, 5, if you're lucky, 3 to 5 years. Then the shit gets really, really hard. Right? And then I would say progressing from that point is, I don't want to say impossible, next to impossible. Right? It's super hard. So that's when all that overreaching and all that, treating people like shit and, putting yourself on a pedestal and all these other things become destructive. They're always destructive, but you don't see it because the progress is being made, right? When that begins to not progress, then you reflect and you see it, you realize you're expanding way too much energy on things that are not making you move towards your goals. Even if it's, forget the training, let's just say it's entrepreneurship or business ownership. You're spending all this time doing these 3 things that take 40 hours per week that make 0 difference on the actual net profit that you're bringing in. But you've always done that, right? So when you step back, you're like, well, fuck. You don't want to. This is the thing. You don't want to give those up because you love those. You really like those. That's the part of the training that you really like, you really love. But do you love it more than making progress, right? Do you love it more than being stronger? Do you love it more than making more money or having more revenue to be able to make more money? That accountability and reality check it's the only way to be able to move forward.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. You mentioned very soon after that about people changing their opinions on certifications. So my question to you is, what was your opinion on certifications in the day? And have you ever wanted to do one through Elite FTS? And if so, what stopped you from doing that?
Certifications are a funny one, because when I graduated from college, or as you would say, university, when I graduated from there, for me to work as a personal trainer where I was at, I had to get my CSCS through the NSCA and the ACSM fitness instructor, which that was way harder for me because that was more metabolic equivalent training, cardio based shit I really didn't care about, the NSCA one. And there wasn't a whole lot of them. They were like, those were like the gold standard. Then there were a couple other ones that were like weekend courses that you could do. Over the years, what's happened is, and that's about the time shortly after that where people would criticize these new certifications coming up. Because essentially what happened was things that we would call seminars became certifications, because for a seminar, you can only charge X amount of money. Now, if you do that same seminar, but you give them a piece of paper with a signature on it to say that you're certified in this, now you can charge twice as much money for that, right? Then there is no checks and balances as far as what that was. So my perception over the years has changed because I didn't like them, obviously, because these over here you actually had to study for and you had to have some degree of competence. If anything, you learned first aid, right? Which is important, you know, if you're in a gym and if you're training people. These other ones, you weren't even learning first aid. So what are you going to do if, you know, somebody passes out or whatnot? Then as all those started to come, and then you see what, then when I realized that, oh, this is just a seminar that they're calling a certification so they can charge more money, then it changed my perception of what that certification was, right? Because when those matured, and I would say they're kind of, it's at a different phase right now. When those matured, then you could go and learn from other people greatly, you know, from that, because they would lay this all out over 2 days or 3 days, and you would learn their core philosophy in that time period, which is just their core philosophy, right? Which I don't really, still don't think a certification, a certification in their philosophy, yes, but multiple, you need multiple to be able to create your own philosophy from there. I would say to me, that would be like the golden era. Because then you could go and then you would know what the West Side Method was. You would know what DeFranco's was. You would know what, you know, Eric Cressy or whoever, all these guys that were doing that. You would know exactly where they're all coming from, and then be able to be in a position to say, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same. There's the difference, there's the difference. And then if you see enough of those things, and you find enough of the things that are the same across all those, guess what? You know what's going on. Now we're in an age to where those are all kind of crumbling. And it's because, in my opinion, they went online. And a lot of the things that you're going to learn from these philosophies.
Let's go with it.
Are in person. The cueing that's going to go with it, what it feels like, you know, what it's supposed to look like. So it's in a weird spot now. But the observation that's odd is those that were like me, that were criticizing all that, are the same ones that now have their certification. But that's okay, right? Because the perception, as I just outlined, my perception on that has changed, you know, over the years, to be able to see it for what it really is, which makes you wonder, did you see it for what they really were from the very beginning? Probably not, because you're too young, too ignorant to be able to know. Have I ever thought of it? Not really. I guess that one part of me still kind of sticks in there.
But if for you certifications are kind of like you have been exposed to this core philosophy of this way of thinking, this coach or whatever, out of curiosity, if you were to do one, what would be the core philosophy of the Elite FTS certification or the Dave Tate certification? What would you want people taking away from that?
Dave Tate here from Elite FTS to talk to you about bands. We've been a supplier of bands for almost 2 decades now. So I know my way around the band landscape. When I'm talking about bands, I'm talking about floss bands, long bands, short bands, bands you can use for resistance training, mobility training, body weight training, and flossing. One of our most popular bands, or actually our most popular bands, are the long bands. The long bands are typically used the most with squats, bench presses. Our floss bands are bands that you wrap around the joint to be able to help with mobility, circulation. And the short bands are designed for shorter range movements, bench press, deadlifts, and a lot of times people will use them with resistance machines to help accommodate the strength resistance curve. Head over to elitefts.com and look for bands in the toolbar or blowout menu. The ability to auto-regulate everything with their training.
Sure.
To be able to, and that's a tough one, right? The other thing with the certifications that have to be kept in mind is every single person you give that to then goes into the world and then represents your training philosophy.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what if your training philosophy changes? You know, what if you're a high volume guy, then you become a hit guy 20 years later? You know, they're all certified in this, but they don't know this. You know, so that's one of the things that I've pushed back on wanting to do that. But if it was to be on how to learn how to auto-regulate your training, that's going to apply to everything. It's going to apply to all training. But how do you do that unless you know all the training?
Yeah, sure.
Which means you need to teach them all the, all the training to be able to do that.
Yeah, sure.
Which becomes something that I don't think is doable in a weekend.
No, for sure. Now, you've already mentioned a couple of times that like the education landscape in the fitness industry has changed a lot in your time. So you mentioned in one of your points called Education Echo, which is number 6, for those of you who have the book in front of you. With this kind of hopeful stacking of generation upon generation, each one building on the knowledge from the previous, what do you see the next generation of coaches doing better than the previous? And what do you see as their potential pitfalls? For example, if a lot of their learning is taking place online, what do you think they're going to run into as problems that maybe the previous generation didn't?
The book is free, by the way, so the link's in the description. It's in the chat. The way I see that is, if I'm looking at 4 decades of training, then there's things that I've learned in all 4 of those decades, right? The key is to not forget the main components from each decade. As it moves forward, which I don't know if this is really addressing your question, but the education, because what can happen is you'll move from one phase, say the pre-competitive phase, and then you move into the competitive phase. Then in the competitive phase, you forget the lessons that you learned about training hard, right? Because now everything needs to become optimized. Right? And then when you move to that next phase to where you're no longer competing anymore, then you lose, you have to take the lessons with you, right? It's not like, it's a story. It's not a book with different chapters that when you close that chapter, everything that was in the previous chapter gets forgotten. It has to build onto that story. This is where I see the biggest problem, as people come through, because if they're in that competitive phase and they're out of that competitive phase, it's like, okay, I don't do that anymore. All I do is this health and longevity type of training, right? Which is fine. And I'm not telling them to do maximum strength training. What I'm telling them is to think, what did I learn during that time that made me compete better? Or what did I learn during this, if we want to make it more segmented, what did I learn during this bulking phase that I can use during this cutting phase? Instead of seeing them as these independent things, right? Periodization should have, the transition should go through all of those to be able to build one upon the other, right? Does that make any sense? Or am I just kind of rambling? That's what I see the problem. And I used to call this program hopping. Like they'd buy this 12-week program, do this, then go straight to this program, but not look and see what was beneficial, out of the other program that I did. Because everything throughout this whole process, what may not work now may work later. Right? But a lot of people would just discount that. That doesn't work. I mean, how many times have we heard that? That doesn't work. Well, it didn't work then, but it may work now, and it may work for somebody else. So that's the bias becomes, as you move through these decades, the bias can either become extremely reinforced or it can become extremely open to new ideas, right? And that's kind of really easy to see with people that have been around for a long time, because if their bias is too locked in, they're not open to new ideas, you can tell real quick, right? Because this is and it's probably the same in every profession, there's so much that the more you learn, the more you realize you're an idiot. I've been doing this it's more than 4 decades. And I feel like an idiot most of the time when you just start looking at all this stuff and it's like this, and that's where you should be, because then you're going to be open to listen, but if you've remembered the lessons through each one of these things, your bullshit detector is going to be on high alert.
Yeah.
So you'll hear something and that doesn't sound right. Doesn't mean it's not right, but that gut feeling matters.
Yeah.
Because more than likely it is bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned people's biases there, and like, do you feel that now it's very easy to exist in an echo chamber now, especially with the way social media is and stuff like that? Do you find that people's biases are more ingrained now and it's harder to break through, or do you find that social media has increased their ability, or just even the amount of free resources out there has increased their open-mindedness?
Depends where you look. If you look online, you're going to say, yes, they're all locked in, and their bias is super strong. They're not willing to look outside of that until you see those people in real life. Real life and social media are two entirely different things. Yeah. Vastly different, and I don't know how much that really blends. Because I'm not that social of a person. Sure. So I'm not around a whole lot of different people. So you can make the argument, well, you live in an echo chamber, you live in a bubble, which I do, but we see enough people coming out here that are from all over the place. And yes, it's a bubble because they're still interested in strength, but not all of them are competitors. They're coaches and all these other things. And all the shit that we see online that you think are these different echo chambers, they're not in them, which makes you wonder, is what I'm seeing true? I don't think it is. That's a lie. Everything that I'm seeing online is a lie. True. From training and everything else in person. So the answer is, in the real world, yeah, people are open. Online, no, they're not.
No, I mean, I'd have to agree. I mean, we just did a Train Your Ass Off event this weekend, and we've, had some super advanced people coming to those events, and you can say to them, look, I know you squat 800, but your squat is trash. Sorry. And there's very rarely any pushback. It's kind of like, tell me more. Yes. Which if you went off people's social media behavior, whatever you want to call it, you really would not expect that uptake.
Well, it depends how you look. It's part of why I wrote this book, perception, right? What are they looking at? Right. So here's this post that may say X. And that post has 2,000 views, right? 7 comments. 4 of the comments may not be complimentary to it, divisive to whatever that post is. The opinions or the perceptions being made on those 4 comments, not the 1,000 or 2,000 people who viewed it. Yeah. That didn't say anything. Right. It's still 2,000. So if we're looking at the percentage, what percentage of the people took this and absorbed it, were either indifferent to it, or thought that it was educational, compared to the 4 out of 2,000? What percentage is that? So how are we backing up and looking at the reality of this whole thing? Yeah.
No, I agree. And your point on perception, I think, is so good, because I didn't think about it this way until you said it in front of me one day. With relation to a coach at an event we did, talking about like social media, like, I don't want to put any effort into it because I've only got 2,000 followers. And you say, well, if you had 2,000 potential clients in front of you, how much effort would you put in? Yeah. And I think you could literally watch like the penny drop with him. Like, oh, like they're 100 of them might be your mom and your family or whatever, right? But the rest are people who actually want to hear what you have to say, and you're just disregarding them at the drop of a hat. So that's a fantastic point. The next section of your book is called The Business of Strength, which is a really good section, I think, in terms of blending the two together and showing how so much that's the same. So in your opinion, what does the next kind of decade look like for the strength industry? You've got 4 decades behind you now to see how things have changed incrementally or perhaps chaotically. What do you think is in the next 10 years?
That's kind of a weird one for me to answer, because I know there's 2 pieces of this. There's the education piece, the coaching piece, and then there's the retail piece, right? Where the education coaching piece has always been complementary, for Elite FTS, the articles, the Table Talk podcast, this book, all this stuff's always been complementary. But that's how a lot of people make their living, is that. So on the retail side, that's what pays for the content. So when I'm asked that question, I got to navigate these 2 different fields, because a lot of people that are listening are in this education side. How is that going to evolve? Nobody can predict the future, right? I think that's going to get, I don't want to say, what's the word I'm reaching for? I don't want to say washed out, is cleansed. It's going to get cleansed. Like all the people that everybody has been complaining about, coaches that don't have experience and all that, they're all going to get washed out. They're going to get washed out because large language models are going to eat their lunch, right? They're just going to be washed out, which is great for the people who do know, right? Who are good at what they do, because it's going to allow their pricing models to actually represent the value that I think they're worth. There's value and market value, but there's, there's a big discrepancy there, but it will allow them to have that value, because you need that personal interaction to be able to get the best out of people. The copy and paste Excel sheet people are going to get waxed. They already are. They just don't know it. And they never made it anyhow. If I don't know if you can use Wayback Machine on social media, but if you could use Wayback Machine and go back 10 years and look at all the people that were online coaches and so forth and compare, are they still around now? They're not. The majority are not. The good ones rose. That's just going to happen at a more expedited rate. On the retail side, the market is what the market is. It always kind of shifts and pivots and stuff like that, but people are always going to need equipment to train with. They're always going to need support gear and all this other stuff to be able to do that. So does that answer? I mean, my advice to the people that are on the education side is to learn how to embrace the large language models to be able to help them do more of what they make the most impact doing. And that's communicating with the people. You don't make a giant impact with the 30 hours a week you're writing and adjusting programs. Right? That's not where that impact, the impact is the deliverable of the program and teaching them how to become Audible ready for that. Some people don't want to be Audible ready. They just want to be told. That's the majority of the people, by the way. And so those copy and paste people don't know how to do that. They're going to be waxed. And I don't love seeing anybody. I'm going to love seeing them get waxed, right? Because they're doing a disservice to the industry. Well, they really are.
Because right now you've got the coaches who are doing what you're saying caught in this battle where I'm probably worth X, but I have to charge half of X because I'm competing with these people that are coaching 300 clients at a time, personalized or whatever, and they know if they charge what they're worth, they're going to get zero. So
so those copy and paste people are going to have to compete with the $5.99, $6.99, $10.99 app. Right, which they already are now. But those apps would just continue to get better and better and better and better. From there, wipe them guys out. We're good to go.
So in that section, you make an analogy that I really like, which is looking at accessory movements as in a lifetime setting, where like your accessory movements are the skills that you develop to support the actual big skills that are the big rocks. So given that, should we say, AI-fueled kind of apocalypse for coaches that could be coming, what are the accessory movements, i.e. skills, that you think coaches need to be working on so that when that happens, they are the better coaches that cannot be replaced by those $5.99 apps?
Communication. It's simple.
What does that break down to for you? Because that's a big term, right? Like, so what does that mean to you if a coach has good communication?
Being able to take the idea that you have, the thoughts, principles that you have, give it to who the said client is, athlete, and then have them, I don't want to say do it, have them benefit and forward progress from that. Because we can just say do it, they can do it all wrong, right? So you can communicate, look, I want you to, we'll use the bracing, which watch the video that Tom did on bracing. I want you to brace. Just here's the email. So brace better. Boom, send it out. Yeah. They're not going. They don't even know what you're talking about, right? Because they don't know how to communicate that to them. Right now, that's hard, very hard. If you're going to try to do that in text, but people have. Good coaches have, right? So it's the people that say this, it's impossible, to be able to do this. They're full of shit too, because there's people that have been doing this for 5 years plus, just via text, and they don't even FaceTime. There's no auto, which they could probably do better, but it can be done. But that's a skill, and it's a skill that most people don't have, because how are you going to quantify, did this person derive the benefit that they should derive from that coaching? What metrics are being used to be able to drive that? So being able to take that person and have them move toward their goals is that communication, right? And there's people that are easy to coach, and then there's people that are not easy to coach. Right. The people that are easy to coach, that's where that communication comes in. It can be, this person's just not easy to coach. It's going to take longer. Right. It's going to take, instead of what may take this person 1 month, this is going to take 6 months. I know that. I'm cool with that. I'm just going to change my messaging just to kind of revisit it here and there instead of being all frustrated. That's communication. Right. And the coaches that think that everybody is going to respond the same way are misled. They're wrong. It doesn't work that way. There are no shitty clients. There's shitty coaches, right? Should coaches get rid of clients they don't, get along with? Sure, of course, because there's going to be somebody better for that. But you could also make the same argument to say, maybe you just need to change your style, to be able to work with this shitty client. But that becomes that business side. Is it worth all the time and effort to be able to change the style for that one person? We can just get rid of them and then bring somebody in that's going to be a better fit.
Yeah. In your opinion, how important is it to have worked with people in person to be able to do that remotely? From what you've seen from other coaches doing it well or not well?
It's important. Working with people in person, it's what gives me pause there is you can work with people in person. Let's just say we're going back to the whole bracing thing. You can work people in, but if you don't know what it's supposed to feel like, then you're not going to be able to get them to know what it's supposed to feel like, right? So that division is going to be, well, what if you have a coach that, knows how to coach it, but doesn't know what it actually feels like? So do they really know how to coach it? Now, what if you have a coach that knows what it feels like, just personally, but, doesn't have the experience hands-on getting other people to do that? Which one's going to be the better coach if they're going to be able to do this in written text or in video? The one that knows what it feels like or the one that doesn't? Right. So that's the caveat. So my answer is yes. Doing it in person by far is going to give that experience, but that makes the assumption that the coach knows what all this stuff feels like themselves, and that may not be the case. That's more important.
With what will be like the proliferation of these large language models and the apps, as you say, do you think, like right now, online coaching is a lot of the consumer space for coaching? Can you see that flipping back the other way? Do you think people are going to get fed up of remote and lack of human contact, and it's going to swing the pendulum back the other way, where they want the face-to-face time with the coaches?
Yeah, but not the majority. There was a huge pivot during the pandemic, that pulled a lot of people in, but that bell curve, it's on the back end, so we're kind of seeing, I'd be interested to know now that it's on the back end, what is the number of total clients across the board today compared to 2019.
Sure.
Right. I'm going to speculate it's probably the same. Right. So I don't know where I was going with this, but because that was the first thing that kind of stands out. What was the question again?
Will in-person training become more prolific as the AI takes over?
Yes, because we're still people. Mm-hmm. We're still human, so we crave being around other humans. So I don't know when this is going to happen, but I've said this multiple times. Bars, restaurants, gyms are going to become gathering places, right? The younger generation doesn't really even drink anymore, right? So the bars are kind of in a weird spot, right? So the gyms are kind of this, yes, I think that's going to happen. Now in the gyms, when this happens, I don't know. I'm kind of like being an Alex Jones and just speculating what's going to happen. If I was the person in the gyms that was the online trainer, I would really be working in the background on how can I work better with groups, which they should already be doing anyhow. Yeah. But let's just say this huge influx happens, just 10X's. All these trainers are going to be like, oh shit, I have all this giant waiting list, but I don't know how to train everybody together yet. There's strength coaches in universities that work with 100 athletes at a time.
Yeah. So it's obviously doable to a very good level as well. In that scenario, something that's really common actually that just brought this to my mind. You mentioned in this section of the book about like mixing your passion with your business or your career and how that can be a great thing and also a not so great thing. You mentioned, how many people start off kind of doing all this stuff for free just because they want to help, which is great. But, there's also a lot of coaches out there right now that, one was here at the weekend, for example, that because they're passionate, they find themselves getting exploited in that, they would do it for free almost, but obviously they all have bills to pay like the rest of us. And there are many gym owners in that same scenario. How do you kind of suggest people work through that almost like guilt-ridden approach to, I deserve to make a good living for what I'm doing. I need to charge you more because although I love doing it, it doesn't mean I should suffer for it. Does that make sense? How do you get around that kind of paradigm?
A gym owner, you're dealing with the gray area, right? Because what is part of the membership, right? So again, this is just going to boil down to communication. Like when the member signs up, what is the expectation they have of that membership? And then whatever that expectation is, then you need to stay in the role of that expectation. So if the expectation is you just pay $30 and come in and train, and, we'll have people keep an eye to make sure you don't get hurt, right?
Sure.
For that person, you got to keep your mouth shut, when they're doing these little nuanced things that you want to help them with, because you also work as a trainer. And if you work as a trainer, then that's what that is. Then you got to work on your sales skills to be able to do that. So it's defining the roles, very well and making sure the expectation of those roles are there. It's hard, right? Because you want to help people, right? And so we all see a lot of stuff, a lot of nuanced stuff. Are they going to get hurt? Yeah, then intervene. But at the same time, if they're just paying for the membership, they may discount everything you're going to say, from that. Now, if you have the service, then that's an opportunity for you to be able to upsell into whatever that service is. Just make sure it's very clearly defined. I would suspect in most cases, it's not. Okay. They join the club, and then you have the owner who's also training clients because that's probably how they really are paying the bills, outside of the membership. And then when they don't have clients, they're on the floor and they're helping all these other people. They have to work on better ways to be able to navigate that and communicate that, to be able to know that this is a service that I provide. I'm more than willing to be able to do it. I was in a situation similar to this. I didn't own the gym, right? But I was a fitness instructor and a trainer. Yeah. So when I didn't have clients, I would find people and basically offer them a free session, and I would explain it that way. Like, this is a session, but I'm bored out of my freaking mind. Yeah. So what would you like to work on? And then just go from that way. So there was a clean distinction between this and this. So they weren't coming in and saying, oh, I see you're free. Yeah. Can you help me with my traps or whatever the hell, abs, whatever it is. Like, no.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, because a lot of the time that, when I speak to these coaches or PTs or whatever, a lot of the time it boils down to they let themselves get exploited, and they almost put themselves in that trap where, I overrun every session by 20 minutes, or someone cancels on me at 5 minutes notice and I don't charge them, or whatever it is. And I guess then it starts coming down to they're going to value your time as much as you value your time.
It's not that complicated. It's not like we don't have other professions out there, attorneys, psychiatrists that operate on the same type of models.
Yep.
You think the attorney's just going to sit and chit chat, help you for 30 minutes after the hour and not get billed for it.
Yeah.
You're probably getting billed every 6 minutes. Every 6 minutes, probably an hour. Right. So there are other models to be able to look at.
Yeah, sure. I think people maybe just presume that because they love this thing, and maybe they see that other people see it as like a luxury, that they can't treat it as hard.
Yeah, but you think the lawyer doesn't love law?
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
All these other professions have to navigate these same things.
Yep.
We like to think that we live in this bubble, that we love our jobs more than everybody else. And that's complete bullshit, because anybody I talk to doesn't love their job 100% of the time.
Sure. Yeah.
We're all fortunate if we love 10% of what we do. Yeah. The other 90% sucks. It's called work for a reason. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, I like that. The next section of it, I'm going to move on from the business of strength onto, you titled it Culture Shifts and Humility. And there's a point in there, which is number 17, which is probably one that's going to be very pertinent to a lot of people, which is strength versus health. Okay. So it's interesting there because even in the title, you've almost put them as opposing forces, right? Was that on purpose or was that subconscious? Okay. So how would you, let's say you've got a 19-year-old powerlifter in here today who could be one of the best there's going to be. How do you put it forward to them that dynamic needs to be looked after to a point where his upper ceiling is going to be higher if he does the things, or she, that they don't think is important for their health right now? Because that's kind of what you allude to there, that you take from that health bar too much and it ends up ruining everything. So how do we ingrain that in people from the start?
If they're just starting and their passion is through the roof, you observe, because there's nothing you're going to say. Anything you say is just gravel before pavement, right? It's not going to be, this is a being on the other side of the table thing. Yeah. Right. They're making progress, and I would probably tell them, as long as you're making progress, don't change anything. They're making progress until an injury happens or until that progress starts to cease. And they've been around. If we're talking a competitor, they start training, they start making gains. If they're somewhat genetically suited, they're going to make even better gains. And then they're growing at this rapid rate that after few years, like, oh my, if I keep doing this, I'm going to be breaking all-time world records. They haven't hit that reality check yet, right? So you can sprinkle the stuff in there about recovery. I would use the word recovery, not longevity, just recovery. So you can express your strength better on the heavier days, recovery. And then once they hit that, then you can start looking, then they're going to have a better idea of, oh shit, this was easy up to this point, but to get to this point, this might take more years than I thought. Like getting from point A to point B, 2 years, getting from point B to point C, 10, right? When they at least can start to comprehend that, right? They all will, because that's usually when people will quit. Right. So they'll either quit or they stay. Right. If they quit, you don't have to worry about the conversation.
Sure.
If they stay, then that conversation shifts into, okay, you think it's going to be 4 years. The reality is, if you're a competitor and you're going to compete over these 4 years, 2 times per year. So we have 8 competitions. Based upon the 8 competitions you've done in the past, how many of them actually went really well? Oh, 1. Okay. So 1, maybe 2. So we can't assume that all 8 of these are going to be all PRs, because your history doesn't show that. Right. So maybe because you're smarter now, 4 of the 8 will be, right? Which means 2 of those years, time-wise, are, so you're going to need more than the 4 years you think. You're going to need 6 to be able to get to where you really want. So now that we know that we need 6, how are you going to get there? How are you going to make it? because you've already strained your bicep, you've already strained your pec, you've already pulled your hamstring 3 or 4 times. How are we going to get 6 more years doing what you're doing here? And then it's like, oh shit, I'm not going to do that. Maybe we need to start looking into these other factors that are going to be able to help with longevity of the sport. Like how, because there's 2 types of longevity. There's the longevity, like can we live longer, which I think we're all predetermined to die at a certain age. So take that as a grain of salt. But I get what people are talking about with feeling better, longer, higher quality life.
Sure.
That's different than longevity of sport.
Yeah.
So you broach that conversation with that person of longevity of sport. And that's easy with anybody that's been around for a long time, because had I had 4 more years after my peak, I would have done way bigger things.
Yeah.
But guess what? I couldn't. So that's too fucked up. I was too fucked up because I didn't think there was good, you know, you don't, you think it's just going to last forever.
So is that again like a perception change or a perspective change? I'm sorry, like they view their career as like 4 years from now I'm there. Whereas you're kind of like, no, let's take that, what you think is the finish line, and be realistic and push that further forward. And that kind of automatically changes the tactic, I suppose.
Well, it's an important intervention time, right? Because they'll see what you just said, this is going to take longer than I have. Or the alternate approach is, I just need 1 more year. Then I just need 1 more year.
Yeah.
That approach leads to radical, crazy shit.
Yeah.
Which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, but normally doesn't get them more than a couple of years.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And that divide is very apparent. And once they go down this road here, like I'm just, whatever this year is, fuck it, I'm taking everything, I'm doing all this. If you don't intervene fast enough, they're going to be gone within 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to intervene after they've already been doing that for, you probably have clients like you pick up these clients after they've been doing that for 1.5 years, and they're so fucked up that you can try your best to unfuck them, but you're never going to be able to unfuck them to the baseline where they were before when they made that decision.
No.
So the faster you can catch them on that road, the better it is, but they need to be open to it. And I think they are. I think that's where we deal with that online coaching, that communication aspect of that is the skill the large language models are never going to be able to do.
Yeah, sure. In that scenario where you're talking about that kind of, it's almost like a turning point for them to shift their perspective. In the best interest of an athlete, then, do you almost think they're better off having something not catastrophic, but negative happen early on that forces them to face that reality early in their career? Or are they better off thinking they're superhuman for longer and then having to make that adjustment when they're at a higher level?
Well, first off, it's going to happen. And if it happens early on, I don't know if it's at that stage, if the catalyst is going to be enough for what we're talking about. Because if it happens early on in that one phase, then that injury just becomes, how long is this going to take? It becomes the next driver. It's not the 400-pound bench. It's, I need to get back now from this. This is my challenge. This is not going to beat me. Right? So it becomes this different thing. You know, it's like it's the enemy, not the ally.
Sure.
Right? It has to become the ally. Right? When this is now the ally, then it will work. So it depends where it falls in the developmental phase.
Yeah. So is it inevitable then?
Yeah.
As in, what I mean is, have you ever met a lifter that didn't go through that cycle?
Yeah. It's in anything in life, you know, in business, are there going to be times to where you're going to almost lose everything? Yes. You know, are there going to be times in a marriage to where you want to fucking divorce? Probably. You know, are there going to be times to where you want to stick a knife in your head? You know, you want to, how can I say it online? You want to axe yourself. Yeah. You know, there's a big difference between wanting to axe yourself and being okay with just dying. Right? Which neither are good. Right? But there's a big difference between those two. All this is life. You know, to think that life isn't going to happen in training is fucking retarded. You know, it's going to happen in training. And you want it to happen in training because you have better control of the variables. There's only so many things that feed into this training sphere, right? And life, when it happens, the variables are freaking infinite. If you don't know how to handle those situations, injuries, whatever, bad meets, whatever, bad day, whatever. If you can't handle that and learn to handle that in the gym, good luck. And you're missing a huge component that being in the gym can have. I'm not saying people that don't train can't develop those components. They most certainly can. That's the majority of the population, but it's all the same.
Would you say in that scenario for that particular life lesson, which is something you allude to a lot later, to considerable extent later in the book, can that be achieved through almost any endeavor that just forces you to aim upwards?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be lifting, it can be whatever, like football or, any sport or any hobby where there's some kind of objective measure of progress.
Yes, you should aim up in everything. Anything, well, not everything, but you should aim up. You should be aiming up in something, right? Because if you're not, you're complacent. You're a victim. Don't be a fucking victim. Aim up in anything. You can aim up in a friggin' video game. Just try to get better at something. After the first learning phase ceases, when it gets hard, right? It's best to aim up in things that are going to actually help you, in your life in some capacity. Training will help your health, which can help everything else. If it's some skill in your profession, you might know your job inside and out, but you don't know what your job is going to be 2 years from now. You don't know the skills that are going to be required 2 years from now, but you should have a pretty good idea on the skills you don't have. So you should devote some time into working those skills you don't have and know it's uncomfortable and know you're not going to want to do it. That's life. And if you don't, you're fucked.
So for you then, this is skipping way forward, but it's very pertinent. Was lifting for you, was the biggest benefit that you gleaned from it, the early part of your career, the fact that it was something that made you aim up? Because, you talked about how like you were a special ed kid and stuff like that. You kind of had a ceiling put upon your supposed potential. Was lifting and perhaps also wrestling then the biggest benefit they gave you was something to actually aim up at, whereas everyone else was maybe telling you to aim down or not at all?
Yes, certainly. But there's a lot of things that go into that, because when I look back on being special ed and, having a little clock and having to go see the tutor and having tutors over the summer and all this other stuff for a long time, this is where time, you perception, all this changes over time. For a long time, I looked at that with vengeance. Fuck these people. I'll show them. Right. And when time passes, you look at things different, right? So I could look and say, what, my parents put me in this situation, right? They could have moved me to a different school or whatever it's going to be. It's easy to look at that, put that blame there, separate a little bit and think, oh, wait a minute. They hired a tutor to come to my house 3 times a week every single summer, right? So when you look at those situations that were adverse, that shape you, it's very easy to look at those and pin blame on these different people and, take that vengeance for that. But when you look there, there's other things that were happening, other interventions that were happening that you're ignoring, that were actually more important than the actual thing, right? So when it got to the point that I realized it was me, my perception of those events was not right, was holding me back, was hurting me. Fuck me. So that's where the whole F you on my, when I do max attempts, it used to be fuck them, for what they did. And it's like, no, fuck myself for thinking they had control. I always had control. Right. So those things shape us, but your perception on how you see them is huge, and it will change. It should change over time. Right. Somebody does something to piss you off, you're going to be upset. Right. Further you get away from it, you get far enough away from it, and you look back and say, man, that was really fucking necessary, for what I'm doing right now. thank them, for that.
So is that realization akin to the you're not stupid, you're just lazy moment?
Yes.
I can't remember who said that to you. I'm sorry.
Wrestling coach.
So when that happened, that obviously triggered something in you, right?
Yes.
But what was that thing?
Well, this was a guy that was my wrestling coach, and he was jacked and would always run around saying rip or be ripped and all this other kind of shit. And so I looked up to him. And then when I went to college and flunked out, came back, while I was there, I discovered the library for the very first time. And while in the library, I found the National Strength and Conditioning Journal, International Journal of Sport Nutrition, Soviet Sport Review, all this shit. I had notebooks full of fucking notes. Keep in mind, I'm not studying anything in my classes, but I'm all about this. I'm just looking at the syllabus and going to take the test and wonder why you flunk out, right? And so when I come back and I see him in the gym, he asks me how I'm doing, and I start telling him, man, we don't know what the hell we're doing training-wise. And I just start, just blasting all this stuff on there. And he stopped me and said he already knew that I flunked out, and said, no, I want to know how school's going. I'm like, it's just not for me. Everybody was basically right. I was tracked, to work in this factory and so forth. So I'm home. Cool. We're going to train together. We're going to do this shit and we're going to get really fucking strong. And that's when he said, you're not stupid. You're just fucking lazy. And that made me stop and think, right? A lot, and cried for probably an hour because I didn't know the answer. Now, that doesn't mean other people weren't saying that.
Sure. They
probably were the whole time. I'm pretty sure my tutors were not saying you're fucking stupid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like but you see the perception, boom, it shifts. And so then I went back to discover, is this true? And I was fucking lazy. And I find out 20 years later, whenever I went back to thank him, because after I wrote the Under the Bar book, I decided I'm going to go back and thank these. Well, two things. If my parents show it to them and they read it, it's kind of fucked up. Like I should tell them, so they should know that they're in this, but I should also thank them for what they did. And the several coaches that I mentioned in there had no clue, which was another awakening. Like how many people that have helped shape your life have you never told? They may not know. They may think they didn't make a difference with anybody. Which is the case a lot of the times, especially when you speak to a lot of teachers and so forth, because most of what they hear is going to be bad, so that's like a game changer there. I found out later at that time that the reason he did that is he was in the same situation I was, labeled the same way, and realized that he was just lazy. And that's when he changed.
Why do you think him saying it had such a more profound impact on you compared to everyone else? Was it how you viewed him, like he had your best interest at heart, or was there just some kind of unspoken, you kind of knew that he was coming from a similar place, even if he hadn't told you, perhaps?
I'm full meathead mode at that time too. So I think it was just the bluntness of it. He wasn't trying to sugarcoat this. He wasn't trying to, not hurt my feelings. I mean, it was just blunt, boom. It was harsh. And it was hard. And there was probably more to that conversation than just that one sentence. But I remember that one sentence, and I remember it was hard to hear.
Sure.
It was brutal, and I was probably pushing back on a lot of it too. Saying this bullshit. You look at what I squat. What do you squat? What do you bench? I'm sure all that happened. But all that got washed out with that one sentence. So I think I looked up to him.
Yeah. So that it was in a language that you needed to hear it.
Yes.
And it sounds, you've said so many times about lifters that come out on this podcast, for example, that, you're all in on the things that you want to be all in on.
Yes.
And I was. Sounds eerily familiar right now.
I was. And I continued to, but at least at that point I realized, I have to graduate just to know I can graduate.
Yeah.
It didn't even matter what it was going to be in. I just had to prove to myself that I'm not lazy and that I can do this.
Now, this is going to be quite a long-winded question, so I apologize, but there's a really interesting, call it phenomena in psychology, which is called the Pygmalion effect, which I probably pronounced wrong, which is basically, and they've studied this in kids at schools and stuff, where the higher the expectation you put on them, regardless of their initial level of potential, they reach a higher ceiling, provided you provide the adequate support. And then there's the opposite of that, which is called the golem effect, which I assume they haven't tested, where the lower expectations you put on people, the less inquisitive they are, the less brave they are, and ultimately the lower the ceiling they end up reaching. You have been on both ends of that. You've been the special ed kid, and you've been barked at by Louis Simmons that you need to be on the record board or you're useless, right? So in your experience, how much did the expectations that were put on you frame your ability of how like you viewed your own potential and how much effort that you put in?
The first thing that went through my mind is, thank God I was able to compartmentalize each of these. Right. So the training was compartmentalized completely different than intelligence.
Sure.
Right. So I don't need to be smart to be able to be good at this. Right. So then that wasn't going to have any impact on this, because I knew people that were way stronger than me that were, for lack of a better way to explain it, much dumber than what I was. You know, so does that still exist? The education thing? Yeah, it does. You know, I have to reframe that a lot. You know, I have to reframe that if I'm reading something, you know, that's a little deep, right? It's like, fuck it. No, you need to do this. You know, maybe you're going to have to read it 3 or 4 times. It's still there. You know, is it this learning disability? Is it the expectation? Who knows? Who cares? It's there, right? It's what I do with it. You know, do I lean into it? Do I lean away from it? So now if those were, I don't know how to answer that if those were intertwined, right? And I guess they kind of did a little bit, because I was able to learn a lot about training. I can retain a lot about training. I can't retain a lot about other things that I read, you know, so and maybe everybody's a little bit like that.
So do you think in that circumstance then, you know, intellect, intelligence, whatever like broad categorization you want to use is quite intrinsically linked to just your level of passion for the thing? Because like you can probably, it would be very fair to say that if IQ was measured just within the realm of training, you would score extremely high. Yeah, if you wanted to have an extremely high IQ at whatever else that you're not interested in, your evolutionary psychology book, whatever in your office, no matter what, you probably couldn't achieve the same thresholds. So do you think then with that for all of these coaches and all of these, you know, gym owners and whatever, when they're wondering about like what direction will I go to perform at my best, that should be what leads them primarily? Like, where does it feel like your passion wants to take you?
The passion and the ability to not quit. And here's what I'll throw out there with that is in training, you know, for everybody that knows training, how much of the knowledge that you have about training do you actually use with the people you work with? Very small percentage. That's going to be the same with any profession. Hey guys, if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure to take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. You know, I used lawyer before, another way. How much of their knowledge is actually used on the day-to-day basis? Very small percentage, right? So is IQ the most important variable? If you only use a very small percentage, if you know how to implement that percentage, and you're willing to, you know, grind through and do all, there's a lot of people with very high IQs that are not successful. A whole lot of them. Why? They should know how. What do they not have? They don't have the balls, and they don't know how to keep going when things are hard. You don't need a large IQ to have balls and to keep going when things go hard. Some people could probably argue it's better to not have the high IQ, so you don't know how bad really is. You just kind of push through that. That's the more important variable than the others, because you can take anybody that's highly successful in any field, quiz them on whatever it is on that broad thing, and they probably won't do very well, but they excel at what they do. They're amazing at what they do compared to their counterparts that know all of it, but don't know how to implement shit.
So that ruggedness, determination, whatever you want to call it, you mentioned it's number 42, Waiting for Mom, which is basically a story about you getting shit kicked out of you. You mentioned how that was kind of a light bulb moment in a way. Was that what it taught you? That you could just be knocked down, beaten down, metaphorically and literally, and just stand back up on your own? Was that because you mentioned that it kind of did something that previous beatings didn't?
It happened a lot. So I got beat up a lot. So this one instance it wasn't even because I got my tooth knocked out with a bat once, and that happened before that. So it wasn't anywhere near as bad as that. But I don't know, a divine intervention. I don't know what it was. But after that day, because I remember, being on the ground and my face shoved in shit, all this other stuff. And, people that you think would be helping you are not, they're just, everybody's like group of people watching, like nobody's doing shit. And they all left, and then I just got on one knee and I stood up. And I'm like, this is it. Done with this shit. So I don't know. It was just a pivotal moment. I'm done with this. This is not going to happen again. And that just happened to coincide with about the same time that I got my first weight set. So then you get bigger, you get stronger, and then here comes the vengeance. Like, okay, fuck you guys. It's a whole other story, but
did you take vengeance?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
And I shouldn't have, but I did.
What makes you say that?
Because that's not the best course of action, right? Because then it's going to reinforce, and it did. This is the way to solve the problem. To go after and vengeance is never the way to solve the problem. Because that's still external. It's not not internal. I didn't internally fix shit. I just felt better because I beat the shit out of all the people that beat me. But what good does that do except lead me down a road that, actually put me into a powerlifting gym. So, so that's led me to a road of a lot of courthouse visits. And then from there, my dad knew the chief of police that was co-owner of a powerlifting gym called Finley Barbell Club. And so it wasn't about the powerlifting. It wasn't about the training, even though I was doing the plastic weight shit and all that stuff for wrestling. It was about, I'm going to put my kid in this gym where there's, 10 cops that are training, right? If that will keep his nose clean. And it really didn't, but the passion for powerlifting did. It's because like, this shit's cool. Like now I can take all this frustration and rage, I can take it out here, in a productive way, and not over here in a way that's not going really well.
Yeah, sure. But like that outlet that you're talking about there, whatever you want to call that thing, that drive, that powerlifting is allowing you to disperse, or like a valve or whatever. Do you think that for a lot of people is like the most important reason is not only why they need to train, but why they need to be able to keep training?
Yes, but you need to also understand that it's a shitty way to take care of your issues, right? It's a good Band-Aid. It's a great Band-Aid, but that's still not addressing the issues. It's just a way to take it out, right? But that's the only caveat to that,
sure.
Because iron therapy, like I get all that. I understand all that. It's a good way to Band-Aid it, take its frustrations out and all that, but it's not therapy. It's not looking at the bigger perspective of all this other stuff, because those people can be super high achievers in there, but they're going to be the people we talked about earlier that are going to hit that point. Where am I going to go down this road and try to make it 4 more years, or am I going to go this road and just 1 more year? And that's a dangerous person, that's going down that one road there, because they will, not me, literally do anything, to be able to know how much of that looking back was actually for the sport and to lift more weight, or how much of it was me mentally dealing with my shit.
Yeah.
It's probably more of that than the other, but you got to be far enough removed to be able to look back on that, or have dickheads like me, pointing it out to other people that may be in that same place, to be able to do that. Because had that been harnessed, it would have been a better outcome in all regards.
So does training play that role for you now at all?
No.
So if it's not that valve for some form of internal aggression or demon, whatever verbiage they want to use, what purpose does you allude to it as the puke paradigm. So what purpose do the maxing out sets where you almost black out?
Okay.
What do they serve now if they're not doing that?
It's doing that. But it's not to the same degree as what it was before. But it is being able to put myself in this void place that I literally don't care if I die when I do that. Like, that's what a better way to die, you know. But I understand that's not good, right? But I need it. You know, I probably shouldn't, but I do. But I don't need it to the degree I did before. Now a handful of times a year, right? And then it's good.
True.
You know, if that wasn't there, would I find other ways to be able to have an outlet? Yeah. But I don't know if my performance in other areas would be as high.
True. You say that's not good though, but is there...
Physically.
No, I understand that, but you know, from a global perspective as a human being, do you find that we almost need something where, like, you know, whether it's your max squat a couple of times or an AMRAP or whatever, like, people need some kind of test where it's like, let's see what you're made of today.
I think they do.
So, like, surely the gym is a better place than out on the street in a back of a bar or whatever, you know. So
it could be boxing. It could be any other you know, outlet.
But so in that, that's, I think, an important part of training. So how do we balance the need to scratch the itch of testing, like, what can you take and get back up?
How do you periodize your stupidity?
Yeah. How do you periodize your suffering or self-flagellation versus doing something that gets you better in the long term? But if you're not scratching that itch, you're probably not in the gym long enough to get the long term anyway.
Yeah. The way I do it is I know what that scratch is. Like, this is what it's going to be. And then I push it out far enough to be able to have all the training blocks and all the periodization I need to be able to lead into that, to have the lowest risk. I want to say lowest risk possible, but halfway.
Yeah.
I want to be able to do the thing, right? But I actually don't want the thing to, like, blow my hip out.
Yeah.
You know, I don't, you know, I want to mitigate as much of the damage as I possibly can. And if that goal or objective is big and audacious enough, you're not going to just say, oh, I'm going to do this next week. Like, I could try, you know, but the outcome's not going to be good. I'm going to be fucked up. And if it is something that you could do like that, then it's probably not a worthy enough goal. That's probably not going to scratch the itch the way that you think it will. You know, so that's how I periodize my stupidity.
Sure. But for you then, over time, as you're saying that, let's say, you know, your squat is that itch scratched, whatever. Over time, has your amount of time where you can go without needing to scratch it gotten longer and longer and longer to the point where now you only need to do it once a year? Or are you just finding other ways of doing it in the gym that maybe aren't as effective? Do you understand?
Well, yeah, I have it programmed once a year, but I will do stupid shit multiple times per year, but that's more AMRAP, you know, things like that.
But they're all serving the same purpose?
No.
Okay.
Because the AMRAP is just a gut check. Like, who cares how many reps you can do? You know what I'm saying? Can you do the 4 extra reps that you don't want to do after you want to? Can you go into this place to where you don't even know what you're doing? You know, that's that void place. You know, that can be accomplished through AMRAPs and shit like that, that have oxygen debt associated with it. Sure. Like an AMRAP on a push down isn't going to do it.
Yeah, sure.
Now the other one being the bigger one, that's the bigger itch, because for most of the time that you're working towards that, you don't know. It's like anybody that's going to compete or try to break a record in a lift, you don't know. Is this going to happen or not going to happen? You hope it does. You're doing everything required for it to happen. But come that day, it may not, because that's just how shit rolls. You know, so that uncertainty provides a lot of that drive. There's no uncertainty with this AMRAP type of thing. Now, where it gets messy is if I do it early, like I did this year, then what do you do the rest of the year?
Yeah, sure.
You know, because that's a pillar, you know, because I still haven't figured out how to train for health per se. I mean, it's all training for health, for the recovery and all the other type of stuff. But when that's pulled out, there's just what's the minimal effective dose that I can do across all domains to be able to get through the year, and then anchor something for the next year. I could anchor something, for the next couple months, but I won't.
Sure.
I never have, and I won't care enough because it doesn't take as long.
Yeah.
It's 2 months. Like, what's that? Whatever. 9 months, that's a more tangible.
And it's grand enough to attract your attention.
Yes.
Right. Something that can intrinsically be achieved in 8 weeks probably isn't going to be that great.
Yes.
Yeah. So
if there ever becomes a point I can't do that, I don't know what I'll do. But I think there'll always be a point because I'm still doing it now.
Yeah. You'll find something.
I'll find something.
Some flag to put in the sand, some arbitrary distance away from you. You mentioned the void there a couple of times, and it's point 34 in the book, for those of you looking at it, where you talk about how that has changed for you over your lifting career. Like it's been fueled by different things, or it's been represented by a different place. Why do you think that is? Because I assume the outcome has been the same every time. You want to go to a place where you can perform at your best, whatever your best is at that time. But how you achieve that or what that looks like has been different between your 20s, 30s, whatever. Why do you think that is?
Well, if that's me fighting myself, right? If I kick the shit out of the same enemy 10 times, then what challenge is it to kick the shit out of that enemy 11 times?
Sure.
So I change the enemy. So now it's it's a different thing that I have to beat. So if it originally was, being able to kick the shit out of the people that, beat my ass or whatever it's going to be, that needs to change, what it is, from that. So it's life, so it's basically taking all the things that you're frustrated about, putting it in this thing is like, okay, I'm going to kick this, I'm going to kick this ass, and this is what it's going to be. That should change because you get stronger, mentally stronger, physically weaker, but mentally stronger. So your mental enemy is going to become stronger.
Sure.
Right? The physical enemy is going to get weaker because you get weaker with age.
Yeah, sure.
Which is a weird paradox, right? Because when you're younger, the mental enemy doesn't have to be a whole lot. Fuck that guy that said my squat was high online. Yeah, but that's all he has. Like, that ain't going to do shit for me right now. Yeah. That won't do anything. It has to be something a little bit deeper.
Sure. So it's almost like as you've, for want of a better word, become more peaceful, do you need something, a bigger enemy to rile you? Would that be a fair way of putting it? It takes
I would
more...
say it's stronger. I don't think peaceful would be the answer.
Okay, fair.
Because peaceful would mean that, I could have been peaceful and not had any of these enemies that I had to be.
Yeah, sure.
So no, everybody's got mental enemies. Anybody that says they don't fucking lying. Everybody does. So those should become harder to beat because you're going to challenge yourself more, right? Because you should have mentally already challenged all these other different things that you're dealing with. Yeah. So... No, it's fine. So
at several points throughout the book, you do reference your training with John Meadows, which sounds very hard to summarize in many ways.
Yes.
But you're talking about mental battles there. How did was that for both of you more of a mental battle, like, can we survive this? Or was it more physical?
Physical. It's different. It's way different because the volume was so high, so it was, I don't want to say like, maybe like sprinting, but more anaerobic, aerobic/anaerobic than a single. Yeah. Right. Doing a set of 20 reps, then finding a way to do 10 other ones is a whole different beast than trying to do a single. And that was the beast that he loved to go into a lot, and I was just along for the ride. Sure. I liked it. It was fun, but it wasn't a big enough enemy. Okay. For me to battle in my head. Right. Cause whatever, it's sure I can do this until I puke and whatever. There's satisfaction in the fact, that was really hard, but there's not like, I beat this. For me, it wasn't there. For him, I believe it was. But for me, like, I don't give a fuck if I did 30 reps on leg press with 1,000 pounds. It's whatever. Who gives a shit? It wasn't. But the challenge of just making it through a lot of those sessions was, and that was a big part of what he was trying to do, was to build that work capacity so high that if anybody came out to train, they wouldn't be able to last.
Mm-hmm.
And we did. And it's 100% not necessary for his goal or the goals that I had, but it was fun.
Yeah.
But probably counterproductive.
What makes you say that? What makes you say counterproductive? Like, you guys, did you make good progress during that time?
Yeah, but could we have made the same?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have been the same. So it was different. And I'm glad I did it, because I learned a lot. I learned a lot on what you can do with your work capacity.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a big thing, right? And it's debated a lot with the whole effective reps and all this other stuff, and which still matters the most. But what is all this other stuff that's in there with that work capacity, and what is the optimal work capacity that you should have for the goal that you're training for? And if it's more than what it needs to be, is it necessary or not? I mean, this is not shit that's going to get studied. You just kind of got to look around it. I don't think it is, but if you develop this higher work capacity, but then it gets pulled down to a more effective work capacity, is that going to make that more effective work capacity be done with a higher intensity and, effort? Yeah. Maybe, so it was fun. It's fun, but it's interesting, especially when dealing with a bodybuilding segment, to where training matters, but not as much as in the strength sports. Yeah. Right. So it's different, but on the strength sports, it's, you have to figure out what that minimal effective dose is with that. You also got to balance out the recovery aspects, but then there is the work capacity too, that has to be able to be put in there. And you understand, it's a weird balance to be able to figure it all out, especially if you're trying to periodize it.
Yeah, sure. So when you transitioned back to what would be your own training after training with John, then what was different based on that experience that you had? Like, what did you just look at things differently? Did you program things in that you didn't before? Did you just program more volume? Like, what were the lessons that kind of bled through into your own training beyond it?
There's a few variables that also play into this. There's a hip replacement, during this whole time. So now you're dealing with a lifetime of X number of reps that this prosthetic is going to be able to handle. Do I want to, reduce that by doing multiple sets of 30 on a leg press? Sure. Is that worth that cost and price? So that first balance comes in there. Like, okay, now this is going to shift because they told me 15 years, maybe 20 years. I'd like to be able to get the 15 years, not 10, out of that prosthetic. So I'm going to pull out all this, even if I wanted to do it, which some I do, I'm going to pull that out because the risk is no longer worth the squeeze, with that one. And then dealing with heart issues, then later on, now I'm dealing with an aortic valve. Do I want to put that under that stress for 15 reps of squats? That's still stress under one, right? 15 is probably not really fucking good. The one's not good, right? But to compound that, so it's minimizing that risk. So those two variables kind of play into that, to where how can I still put all those things I really love into the training, derive whatever physical benefit I want from that. So it's some of that shit I probably still would be doing if it wasn't for those other two variables.
So you mentioned the one hip replacement there and the heart problem. There's been more, but we don't need to go through the whole list. But you allude to a couple of times in the book about how life takes things away from you, and that's inevitable. And you yourself have had a lot of the things that you strived for in the gym and taken away from you. How do you deal with that loss of identity that comes with, obviously, first you stop competing, that's kind of one identity crisis, but you still have the training, like you can still train hard, you have that to kind of hang your hat on. But now, you have to keep adjusting that to deal with whatever it is your body's capable of. How have you personally dealt with like kind of that change or loss of identity related to that?
It's not easy. So I can sit here and make up some bullshit and lie, but it sucks every time I lay down the bench and other people are waxing me, because of that. It's never going to go away. So I guess the way that I've been able to deal with it is to understand this is the reality. This is what it's going to be. It's never going to go away. So why should I keep getting upset about it?
Sure.
Because I can't change it. What aspects of the training do I have control over that I can change, and then lean into those other things, and then just do the other shit, realizing you're just going to suck. Just accept the fact this is going to suck. There's a part of me that's like, I could probably make it so it doesn't suck if I, but it's not worth that risk with that.
Yeah.
So it's there, it's always there. You always want to be as strong as what you used to be, or to be as jacked as what you used to be, but just to embrace the fact that it's not going to happen, and it's not because I'm quitting on it and because I don't, see, I'm stumbling on my words because there's still a piece of my brain that's like, well, I could do all this, but the things I'd have to do it are not worth the risk anymore.
Sure.
So
do you think it was kind of a saving grace for you that, you're an all-in type of person, right? Do you think it's a saving grace for you that you basically had your business that you could be all in on? You can put or did that not have any impact? Like they're two separate beings, and that didn't help at all.
No, it was rough for a while because my business is this.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like a constant reminder.
Yeah. So while you're trying to, as I would tell other people that are competitors, like separate, like you need to separate, put some distance between it so you can look at it in a different perspective. When you can't separate because it's part of all of it and it's always there, it's a different type of battle. It's not an easy one, but that identity crisis probably lasted longer than what it needed to be able to do that. It became easier when these things got taken away.
Okay.
Because, now there's a prosthetic, there's a real tangible excuse. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So you don't want to lean on it to be able to say it's an excuse, but here's a tangible, real reason, right? That's not there, then the crisis would still be not as bad, but worse.
Sure. So what are your goals right now that you're striving for? Because I know you're still working towards some things in the gym, and I believe that's one of the questions we got leading up to this was like, what, when you're going in the gym now and you're still training, what is the end goal of your training at the moment?
Because I hit the goal that I wanted to hit for the year, there is no end goal, for this year. It's just ride this year out and figure out during before the end of the year, what I want next year is to be. So there's no rush, there's no pressure to be able to ride this out, to be able to figure it out. And I've thought of a lot of different things, and I'll anchor something before the end of the year, but with the rest of the year, what's the minimal effective dose of the cardio and the training that I need to do. So when January comes, I'm at least at a decent baseline to start a conditioning phase, which will lead into whatever those other phases are going to be. So just not let everything fall completely to shit. Just let it fall to like halfway to shit.
Sure.
Which is hard.
Yeah, I'm sure. But do you think that's something that more people need to do?
It's harder, man.
That doesn't mean they don't need to do it though.
I know, but it's way harder because there's no tangible thing. It's like, I don't want to train most of the time. Yeah. Like, I don't want to do this. I trained this morning. I did not want to do this. So it's discipline's what's basically carrying it. The weekend's different because it's community. There's people, so it's easier, but the week stuff, man, is a bitch. Should more people do it? Probably, because it's going to reinforce the discipline. And I think a lot of people get in these funks and just don't do shit. And I've done that too. I've learned that you do that, then when you start trying to train for something, you're not in a good place to even start, because now you're dealing with, not just the work capacity issues, but the delayed muscle soreness. You're dealing with shit getting sore that hasn't been sore forever, because you're kind of a newbie again. It's like, shit, I should be further ahead, but I wasn't able to train when I wanted to train because I was too fucking sore to walk, and that's with a stupid low dose. Like There were one time 2 sets of 15 on body weight squats wrecked me for a week. That's like shitty conditioning. So that's what drives me now is to not get in that phase to where now I need 8 weeks just to get to a point to where I can start pushing myself from that.
Yeah. So your goal is to be ready for whatever the next goal is that kind of strikes you, as opposed to getting this thing that you now really want and you have to work for 3 months to be ready to start.
Yes. In hindsight, if I was to go back in time, I would put more phases in there where I was training for no goal. So this would be more familiar to me.
Yeah.
You know, but there's always been something, you know, that was out there, and those dead spots they're hard to navigate. So I understand why beginners would have a hard time. I understand why people who are competitors have a hard time after they quit competing. I understand all that because I lived through it. And the only advice I have through it is just discipline it until you find something, you know, to be able to anchor on, or have somebody help you find something.
Yeah, but is that perhaps a skill in of itself then that people would maybe be well advised to try and learn before they have to learn it?
Yes.
Like spend 2 or 3 months just going through the motions. Learn how to go through the motions, learn how to clock in and clock out, because at some point you're going to be there maybe for a long period of time. And if you don't know how to do that, you're going to do the alternative, which is nothing.
100%, because you're going to be there for a longer period of time in your life than you're not.
Yep.
Because you won't compete forever. It won't be your top priority forever. Right? So let's say that makes up, if you're lucky, 15 or 20 years. But you'll be training 60. So you need to learn how to navigate those other 40.
Yeah, sure. Is a blessing of that for you that you then also get, though, 2 to 3 months to think about a goal that's actually worth dedicating the next 12 months to?
Yeah.
Because I imagine, I know because I do it.
Yeah.
It's very easy to just, like a dog chasing cars, go from goal to goal to goal to goal to goal, even if they don't mean anything to you, because you don't know what to do with yourself if you don't have one. Whereas if you can build the discipline to do what you're doing, which is 2 months of not no training, but just go with the motions, you get 2 months to think like, what is actually worth dedicating a year's worth of physical effort and training to? And then you come up with something that's actually worth chasing at the end. Do you think that could be like the biggest benefit for people doing that?
Sure. Yeah, because it could be easy for me to say, let's just recomp, you know, just jump into the next thing. But if I'm not inherently full spirit into doing that, then I'm not going to have what's required when it's going to get harder. And it always gets harder. You know, the longer you do this, the more you don't want to train. You know, so it always gets, you know, harder at that certain point. So to make sure that's what you really want to do, it's a big thing, you know, especially when it's going to take up a large period of your life.
Sure. Now, I do want to mention one on here before I move on to the next section. I have to ask this one, even though it's a little bit of a tangent, but there's a point, which is number 20, which is talking about certainty and confidence. Basically about how, as your time in the fitness industry has gone on, you've gotten less confident but more kind of certain about what you know, and how there's so many unknowns. So the question I had for you is that in the novel Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's a supercomputer. Do you know the novel or the film? Okay.
Yeah.
The supercomputer called Deep Thought takes 7.5 million years to come up with the answer, which is 42, which is the answer to everything. So what I put to you is it wrong? And that the answer is actually, it depends.
No, it is. It depends. It's always, it depends.
Yeah.
Right. It's the biggest truth and the biggest lie at the same time, right? Because everybody wants you to think that, first off, that it's not easy, right? The fact of the matter is it is. You just have to do the things that you need to do. It's very simple. You know, we can make this complicated, you know, have all these periodization conferences and all this other kind of stuff. Fact of the matter is this is actually simple. You know, consistency, you just keep doing the same that. And then when you get into the nuance, when any question's asked, there's always context. It's always going to be, it depends. But it depends doesn't sell anything, right? People want to see, here's the answer, and jump on that answer. So that's what the marketing is. That's what the promotion is. There's not a whole lot of ebooks and shit like that being sold, that the number one things of this program are consistency and a little progressive overload over this period of time. And this is what's going to get you this great. And that's a shitty book title. It's a shitty headline and shitty marketing copy, and it doesn't work. So the other things are what goes out there, and they don't last. It all goes in trends. I've been saying for the last fucking 5 years, at some point we're going to see the reemergence of high intensity training. It's fucking happening, right? So here we go again. So high volume is going to be fucking not worth shit. The high intensity, Menser type shit is going to come to the surface, and then that's going to fade away. And then here comes the high volume again. It's the fucking 8th time I've seen this, go in waves. Yeah. And it's just what it is.
How, as a coach or a lifter, do you not get caught up in the throes of that? These cycles, patterns, whatever you want to call it, come and go, and it's very easy to get drawn into it, like the high intensity training. If that's the next rage, it's very easy to get drawn into that and believe that, because it actually does work. But the truth is that, so do the 99 other things. So how do coaches and lifters kind of keep this broader perspective when we do have a tendency to have so much tunnel vision in like the educational material and everything else?
As you go through this, there's going to be variables. There's going to be clues, consistent things that always work, right? Not movements, but just periodization schemes. How long you need recovery from one heavy bout to another. And if it's not there, what do you do to make the recovery better? Those anchors, as you learn those, are always the same anchors. And the more you do it and the more you pay attention, log things, the more of those anchors you're going to have. I would say after 5-6 years, if somebody's really into this, they have enough anchors to cover 80% of what they need. And stay with your anchor. You don't ditch all your anchors to try something new. You still got this 20%. Play around with it there. Sprinkle it in and so forth. And if you're not laying those anchors, then you have a shitty coach, or you're not paying attention to what you're doing, or you don't care about the progress that you're making. And that's fine, because that could just be this whole fitness type of training that I don't understand. It could just be that. And it's good. It's great, right? It's perfect. You're doing what you need to do. But if you care, then it's just paying attention to those things. If you've been doing this for 5 or 6 years, you have a pretty good idea of what works for you. Then if somebody comes and they start talking to you about X, Y, and Z, and your gut's like, that's a clue, right? Either you need more information, because it could be right. You just need more information to understand how it should apply into what your base already is, and then put it in there, or it's just complete bullshit and trust your gut. When you fall for those tactics, then you're going to just be wasting time.
True. So you've sat here across the table from how many hundreds of guests at this point on your podcast?
400.
Okay, let's go with that. How many things have you gotten that knee-jerk kind of resistive reaction to it? You're like, bullshit. And then upon further education, looking into or whatever, you've turned around and gone, I was wrong.
Quite a few, because there's a lot of things that are out of my scope, right? So the peptide stuff, a lot of the PEDs, a lot of those things are like out of my scope, right? So there's those things. So you don't know. That's why I have you on something, is to be able to help navigate that, because I don't know. They could be telling me complete fucking bullshit, and I wouldn't know, because it's hard to prep for the person and all that,
yes,
at the same time, because that's out of scope. There's been some other things with sport training, which is, I live in this powerlifting strength, absolute strength, maximal strength kind of world, that are fascinating, that I didn't grasp the way that I thought, so it's take X athlete, just make them stronger. They should be better in all other attributes, right? That's true, assuming they're weak as fuck to begin with. Yeah. right? But if they have base strength, then what are all those other variables and what's the interplay between all those other variables? Those are things that I knew they existed, but I didn't know to the degree that they exist. And then the complexity that plays into all of that. And then the other side of, is it even fucking necessary?
Yeah.
You know, if they're a Division I athlete, does any of this shit really matter? Like their sport is probably enough, you know, with what they need to do. So in those then the other ones would be, there can be some guests that their certainty level on what they do is so high that in my brain, you know, I'm not saying that they're wrong, because what they're doing is working for them and it's working for the people they work with. But my bullshit detectors start, you know, wanting to fire when the certainty is so high that everything that they know can be the answer to every powerlifter's problem.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And we all know that's bullshit, you know, including the person that's even saying it. Yeah. You know, it's just, I wish that would be verbalized more, right? Because I know all these people, right? And I know they all know that, you know, but some may not, you know, express that. Sure. And when they don't express that, that makes it really, really hard for the aspiring coaches, right? Because then they're going to start talking about this imposter syndrome or all this other bullshit that I don't even know how to define, you know, that really shouldn't even exist, because if you don't know what it is, does it exist? You get what I'm saying? Yeah. But it will happen because they're going to think that all these people that are talking have all the answers, and they don't. They just have better questions.
Sure. So there's kind of a false proposition that coaches are putting forward that their knowledge is a lot more based in certainty than it is, would you say? So like you kind of talked about how like you become less certain or confident rather in certain things. How do you think we get coaches more at ease with being open about the fact that they don't know everything? Because confidence sells, right? That's probably, I presume that's partly why they do it. Like it creates an aura of knowledge and you want my knowledge. But the reality is that anyone who knows enough knows that nothing is certain. So how do we kind of bridge that gap?
I don't think you do. As long as they know it, because that's not going to play to their favor. If they go to a job interview and say, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing,
sure,
you know, they're not going to get the job. You know, if they tell their clients, look, I kind of know what I'm doing, you know, but there's a lot I don't, it's not rewarded.
Sure.
You know, so what's incentivized and what's rewarded is what you're going to see more of, right? That's not rewarded. It's not incentivized. So you're not going to see it. And that's okay as long as they know it. And most do, right? But they're not going to express it because are you going to listen to somebody on a podcast if the first thing they say is, I don't know shit?
Yep.
You know, then and granted, even when those will say that, their base knowledge is still tremendous, right? It's just they understand there's so much more with all this. They know enough, but you can't say I know enough. It's not sexy. It's not rewarded.
Do you think that more coaches kind of need to realize that, you know, in the job that they do, they only need to know, at least to be good at their job, they only need to know like just enough to help the person they're working with get to the next step. You know what I mean? Like if someone, you know, from step 1 to step 2, and by the time they're at step 2, well, maybe they know enough to get them to step 3, and that's cool as long as they're one step ahead of the demographic.
They need to master that, not know.
Okay.
Right. So knowing and mastering are two different things. They need to master that aspect, and then they can know the other things.
Yep.
Right. But the mastery of that is what's going to yield the greatest success, you know, and that's where from the coach, it can be the Achilles heel because they know it. They want to move on to the other things they don't know. So they want to know. So they know all this stuff, but they haven't mastered the basic things. And then they get waxed by the people that master the basic things, but don't know shit about all this other stuff. And like, that guy's a complete fraud. He doesn't know shit. I beg to differ. You know, all the clients are making great success. He knows how, or she knows how to take the basics and integrate it with that population. So you know a lot, but you haven't mastered shit. You know, so it depends. Do you want to be an educator? Know a lot, right? Then you can put a lot of content out. You can have a lot of stuff out there. Do you want to be somebody that can help people move forward with their training and their goals? Master what you need to master, the basics.
So in that context for you, is the difference between knowing and mastering, like the ability to take the knowledge and apply it to the context? And that can only be done, I presume, really through repetition.
Yes, and the context is infinite. So you need to know how to think.
Yeah, sure.
You need to know how to think on the fly. Like, oh shit, we haven't seen this before. How are we going to do this? You know, but you know what the outcome is that you want. And that's why you need the mastery. Because if you only know one way to be able to get that outcome, then you're screwed. If you know 100 ways to get that one outcome, you're pretty much covered. Every now and again, there'll be something that'll be, oh shit, you got to figure it out, but you got to be able to figure it out on the fly. If you haven't mastered it, you can't figure it out. If you only know it, you can't figure it out.
Yeah. So would you say then for a lot of, it's very easy, we've already mentioned biases, I know, but it is very easy for coaches to get caught up in conjugate or linear periodization, block, you know, whatever, you can put any name there, right? Where they're like, I like this system, cool. But how important is it for those trainers to diversify away from those things so they can have more tools to use in those contexts? Like, I suppose the question would be like, you could be an incredible conjugate coach, but there's going to be a problem you can't solve with conjugate at some point.
Yeah.
How much needs to be done on the kind of the behalf of the coach to be like, I need to be aware of all the things I don't know and walk away from my bias and just get this broader outcome so I can grow my toolbox, because that's probably what makes a better coach in the long term, you could argue.
Yes. I would say they need to know why what they're doing works, right? So if it's conjugate, why does this work? Not just because I need to quote whatever Louis said or anybody else has said, but why? What's the specific adaptation that's being acquired through this training modality? Like, why, right? It's the hardest question to answer because you keep peeling it back. Like you give your first answer, then you ask why to the second answer. You know, ask that a few times to get down to what is the root adaptation that you're looking for. Bam, that's what you want to know. Cool, what other ways can we make that same adaptation, right? Then if it's explosive strength, whatever it's going to be, there's all these other ways, right? Which can go into your program, but it's really not your program because it's coming from this program. It's going in. All programs are the same, right? They're all conjugate, they're all linear, they're all in there. But it's the understanding of the adaptation that some know, some master, right? Some don't know at all. They just know the template. Then they don't take that next step to understand what is actually happening here, you know, from a physical, mental, even technical level. You know, what is that? And if they do that, then they're going to understand, yes, they can still be biased to whatever it is, but they're going to start hacking what they're doing so much that within 1 or 2 years, it's a block program. Or if it's a block program, they're going to start hacking the things, all these, and then it becomes this conjugate program. And it's, as long as it's working and they're evolving, it's good.
That's so in a way then, through that process of why, getting to the root and then thinking, how else can I do this? In essence, every trainer is or coach is kind of building their own philosophy in that regard. Would you say that every coach probably should strive to do that? Because there's going to be a lot of mimicking, you know, like, I want to be like that coach, I want to do it. But in reality, that if they want to have a unique offering, they've got to have a unique offering, which is that the process that a coach does that through. Yeah.
Just ask themselves, how can I be better? It's that simple. Like, how can I be better and not be overwhelmed? Like, how can I make this a little bit better? You know, I don't buy this 1% better every single day, but it should become better. You know, that you should have enough data if you're a coach to know this is working with this group, right? Yes, it's individual, but there are cohorts, that kind of respond the same way. This is working very well with this group, but what could be a little bit better? But the bigger picture is probably going to be most coaches have different cohorts. This cohort's doing really well, but this one really needs, to be addressed a little bit more. So lean into what are the attributes, adaptations that could make this one better, which is fighting the urge to be able to lean into this one, right? Which is the one that you can promote, advertise, brag about and all this other stuff to be able to get this one better, because those attributes are also going to carry over to the other ones as well.
Yeah. So I've got just a couple of questions to round this out now. One of them was, at some point in the book, number 36, you talk about potential, and that human potential isn't limited by the body, it's limited by the mind and your perceptions of what your upper ceilings are. So the question I put to you then is, for someone who grew up, but lifted primarily in an environment where there was always a number to strive for, like this is the upper ceiling, this is the all-time world record. If the mind potentially limits our potential, could there be a higher ceiling if you took people into an environment where they had no idea what the standard was, no idea what was good, no idea what the world record was, no idea what the ceiling could be?
Depends on how you're going to define potential.
Would they reach an ultimately higher level of performance? So, for example, I'll put this in context. When we did a seminar in the Czech Republic, and there was a guy there who I think was basically convinced to be there by his coach. He's like, no, you should come along to this. And he was talking about his training, and at one point we said, what is your deadlift? Because I think we were deadlifting at the time. And he's like, I don't know, I do sets at 5 with like 6 plates on the bar each side. He had no idea how much weight that was.
Yeah.
He also had no idea that actually for someone who weighed like 100 kilos or whatever, that was pretty damn good, especially considering he'd been training for like 2 years. And the coach basically just said, I don't say anything. He doesn't have social media. He doesn't know what weightlifting is, basically. I don't want to tell him, because he sees no reason as to why he just can't keep improving.
Yeah.
Right. So could we apply that in the broader scheme? And do you think people would ultimately get to a higher ceiling if there wasn't this is the most anyone's done?
Yes. I do believe that, but I think you got to look at potential in 2 different scopes, right? So there's the potential that, say, other people see, right? Then there's the potential that you experience, right? So you genetically may not be suited to be able to break an all-time world record. I can argue, and we could argue that maybe you still could, right? But the ultimate potential is your satisfaction with what you've done and what you could do, and did you get the most out of yourself internally? Yeah. So there's the internal potential. That's unlimited, right? That external potential, no, you're not going to squat 8,000 pounds, right? So, but that can be, also influenced by what you see, what you're around. Take a beginner and put them in a gym where nobody benches 2 plates. Take that same beginner and put them in a gym where everybody benches 4 plates. Tell me which one's going to end up benching 4 plates within 3 years. So your social environment, who you surround yourself with, has a huge impact on that, right? And your own limitations, are also play a role into that. So both, or when I'm looking at potential, I'm thinking more of that internal. Are you able to reap the highest that you, that you internally are good with, right? That's different than that other one, because that removes all the social influence, right? We should be trying our best to try to remove as much social influence out of our lives that we possibly can, so we can get to know who our true self is. That's impossible to do, but it's possible to minimize the noise, to minimize those voices, to get closer to that. The closer you are to that overall, the better you're going to be in everything else.
So do you think, let's take your personal powerlifting career. If there was no leaderboard and just you and Louis, for example, in the gym, do you think you'd have got further? No? No. Because you needed that.
Yeah. Because you're seeing it. So if people are lifting things, you go, shit, he can do it, I can do it. So yeah, it's huge.
So it can be a hindrance or potential huge push.
Yeah.
I like that. So one last question before we round up. Number 33, you talk about self-worth. You mentioned seeing like several of your peers pass away or fall into ill health and things like that. So as you've watched that happen now, how has that changed your perspective on the importance of legacy, and what do you want your legacy to be?
We have no control over that. I don't think it's worth spending time worrying about.
Answer.
I really don't. It's, people have spoken at great length about all this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is, throughout my almost all of my lifting career. So from my time in college into now, there's been one person in my life the whole time, and that's my wife, right? So what matters to me is that relationship there. Sure. That's the core above everything else. She's been with me through all of it, right? Through all of that, so to worry about what people think outside of my small circle is fucking destructive to the people that are in that small circle. I've said before, you go to a funeral, you'll see the people that are by the casket, and they're the ones that are mourning bad, and then there's the people that are coming and they're like, how long do we need to stay before we can go get dinner? Yeah. Right. Then there's the people who made a couple comments on something that you made online. Why in the fuck do you care about them when you should care about the people that are in the room that are closest to the casket? They're the ones that build who you are. None of us go through this alone. They build who you are, but I see people that spend too much time focusing on those people that aren't even in the room and wondering, what the fuck are you doing? That makes no sense. It doesn't even feed your soul. Your soul's going to be fed by those people in the room, not by this. So what the fuck are you doing? You already know this is just tearing your soul apart. That person's not. Those people aren't. So what do you want? Do you want legacy where a bunch of fucking online trolls are going to be able to say you are the greatest person in the world, or have a great relationship with the people that are in the room? It's an easy answer.
It is when you put it that simply. Since you mentioned Tracy there is a point in the last section of the book, you talk about spotters of life. What to you makes a good spotter of life? And for context, you're talking about people that basically provide guardrails. Right? Like you have spotters in the gym when you're going for a heavier temp. What makes a good spotter for a person's life?
Honesty. For them to be able to tell you how things really are. Right? So you can interchange spotters, right? I want the realist, sure. And now I want the enabler. I can move them all out, but the back spotter, my faith is never going to change. The family is kind of the side spotter, right? So faith, family, back spotter, side spotter, and then this other side spotter can be interchanged with whatever variable I want, so it's usually friends and so forth like that. But you need all three if you're going to, maximally go into anything. Right? It has to encompass that.
Do you think most athletes or business owners have that?
No. No, they do. But they don't let them spot.
Okay.
Right?
They just think, I got it, it's all me or whatever.
Don't touch it, don't touch it, don't touch it. Sometimes you need somebody to grab the bar when you're benching. You can scream, don't touch it all you want, but sometimes it's going to knock your teeth out. Sometimes you need somebody to touch it. Right. So the ones that are don't touch it, don't touch it, don't touch it, that's kind of encompass that. They're not using their spotters. They're not relying on the feedback. They're not taking the advice that they have. Or maybe they're just filming it and using the fucking screen as one of their spotters to be able to use that.
Sure.
Right. Which is fine, but that's completely not objective because it's you, maybe somebody else kind of looking at that, but what happened in the real world.
Yeah, sure. That's a great note. That is the end of my questions.
The link to the book is in the description. It's complimentary, free, so download it.
Enjoy.
We're done. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All content you see on this channel and at elitefts.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to elitefts.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.